Hello, my name is Rhiannon Danborn. Today you are going to take a test. You have 30 seconds to correctly answer this question. Go. Okay, you're not actually going to have to answer this question. I haven't even solved this. But if you're dying to know, the answer is C. Now, when you heard the word test, you may have panicked a bit or got confused. Then when you heard the time limit combined with the level of the math question and the ticking noise, you may have gotten a bit more stressed. Briefly, and on a much smaller scale, you felt what it feels like to be me when I take a standardized test. Now I'm going to show you another question. Looking at this question, I think we can agree that it looks more achievable than the one that was shown before. Like the problem about the trains, it was hard to answer both parts of the question in only 1 minute. It was also fairly complicated. Unlike the other question, this is a real test question on the Colorado Measures of Academic Success 2018 Grade 8 Mathematics Practice Test. As this looks achievable, you're probably wondering why we're having this conversation at all. Why is standardized testing even an issue? In the last 5 years, I've taken a total of 42 various standardized tests, so believe me when I say that it is a problem. Before we simply accept standardized tests as they are, we have to consider some things. First, the fact that students may not know all of the material on the test due to an overloaded curriculum. There's also anxiety and stress to the highest degree caused by these tests. And to top it all off, these tests aren't even doing anything to prove where students are academically. A major issue with standardized testing is that the curriculum is constantly being changed in the interest of tests. Standardized tests are eating away at time usually spent for other subjects that students are not tested on every year, including social studies, science, and electives. Though these subjects are equally important for students to learn, literacy and math are focused on more in the weeks leading up to testing. A study done by the Center on Education Policy reported, since 2001, 44% of school districts have reduced time spent on science, social studies, and the arts by an average of 145 minutes per week. This is due to increased time spent on the English language arts and math. Coincidentally, these are the two subjects we are required to be tested on every year. For me, and most other students, this is easy to relate to. In the weeks leading up to the state testing, my class doubles up on the time we spend doing math, sometimes going through 3 or 4 math classes a day. There's almost no change in subjects. As students, this means skipping social studies and writing for about 2 weeks. This also means coming home and wanting to do anything but more math the next day, ruining our enthusiasm to learn. Another common complaint in my class is that we're not able to concentrate or learn a new math skill 15 minutes after we've learned another. The numbers and techniques get mixed up and jumbled in students' heads, making it exceedingly hard to focus. It doesn't allow time for students to properly learn, process material, or practice the technique that works best for them. Essentially, our teachers are having us learn around 2 months' worth of curriculum in less than 2 weeks. Thinking about the effect of this, just imagine you're studying for an exam. It's pretty much the same. Who will do better? The student who has been studying for just a bit over the past week, or the student who spends the entire night before the test studying? I think we've probably all done both. But we've been told time and time again which one is better to do. The first one, studying for a portion of time each day, not cramming it all into one night. So then why in school do we do the exact opposite before our tests every year? But the same goes for testing. As students, we will do better learning the curriculum in the typical 2 or 3 months, not the 2 weeks we are given. If you wish for us to do well in CMAS, we need more than 2 weeks to learn 5 units. Another significant factor in why standardized testing as we know it needs to change is because of the stress and anxiety they cause. This is the reason I decided to research this topic further. When I was in 2nd grade, just 7 years old, I had my first taste of standardized testing. As a 2nd grader in Jefferson County, I was required to take the COGAT, Cognitive Abilities Test. Later in my 3rd grade year, when my test scores came in, I learned what it felt like to be defined by a sheet of paper. It sounds silly, ridiculous even, but it's something I've struggled with since then. The scores from the COGAT determined if I was able to be qualified for the Gifted and Talented program. My scores told me that I was not qualified, despite the fact that my teacher had told me otherwise. My 3rd grade self was broken. In my head, that meant, and very clearly, not smart. It was labeled across every other test I took, including the state standardized test, CSAP, that I took later that year. It was a pretty bad introduction to standardized testing, if there was even such a thing as a good one. In 4th grade, it got worse. While taking PARC one day, a student in my class was suspended for talking during the test. He was removed from the room and taken to the principal's office. This incident added more to my nerves of an already growing stress. Time management also became an issue for me. The state tests, which are timed, I hardly ever finished. MAPS, another standardized test we were required to take and standing for measures of academic progress, became never-ending tests I couldn't seem to escape. I vividly remember taking an excessive 4 hours on MAPS in 4th grade, but I was always rewarded with higher scores than before. Come 5th grade, I went back to thinking that tests define my academic success. Provided by the Northwest Evaluation Association, who tests students through MAPS, I was given a sheet of paper with my scores compared to the rest of Colorado. It also featured a projected score for me, which explained that my scores would drop. Not only did this give me anxiety before my next MAPS test in the spring, but it proved to be even worse when I finished my test and my scores really had dropped. No longer was I able to promise myself a higher score when I finished the tests, and, naturally, this intensified my anxiety. Before each standardized test I take, I now force myself to think I am better than this test, over and over again. Unfortunately, this thinking all collapses as soon as I start the test. I worry about my scores throughout the test, changing my thinking to, if I get higher than a 75%, I'll be fine. I can't get below a 50%. That'll mean I'm less academically successful than half of Colorado. My focus is gone. A study showing the correlation between the anxiety of 50 4th graders and their standardized test scores, relationship between test anxiety and standardized test scores, by Beth Ann Fulton, proves that I was not alone. One test determined the relationship between the students' level of test anxiety and their pulse rates, as well as their performance on the New York State Standardized Science Test. The results proved that anxiety and stress from tests is a huge issue. To quote the article, findings of the study are important to school administrators, teachers, and parents because they could illuminate how test anxiety may impair students' academic performance on standardized tests and thereby mask their true abilities. Additionally, I would like to touch on the No Child Left Behind Act, which is a law signed in 2002 by George W. Bush. Commonly brought up in conversations involving standardized tests, it states that every student in grades 3 through 8 and 10 through 12 can and should achieve high levels as a result of testing. Additionally, it proclaimed that federal Title I funding, financial assistance to local education agencies with schools with high percentages of students from low-income families would be withheld if states did not apply. Arguably, this law raised test scores and therefore raised the overall academic success of students. However, not only does this hurt states tremendously if they do not take part in it, but it also overstressed standardized testing, placing all the progress of schools solely on standardized tests. Though the law had good intentions, it is flawed in believing that standardized tests are accurately measuring the growth of students and therefore the progress and growth of schools. This has introduced what is called teaching to the test, where teachers teach students material that is most likely to appear on the test. skipping over units that will most likely not appear on the test. This is becoming more and more apparent in classrooms, thus persuading teachers to focus and spend more time on subjects that we are tested on. Now, here I am in 6th grade. I still struggle a ton with standardized tests, and I don't yet have a coping strategy. None are provided. No matter how many times someone explains to me, or I explain to myself, that I am more important than my test score, I can't seem to believe this. Instead of more tests and higher expectations from the results of tests, we need to change the way we test. We need to look at tests as they were first intended to be, something to give our teachers an idea of how well we learned a unit or subject, and an indicator as to what they need to go over again. It needs to be recognized that standardized tests do not define our academic successes. As Diane Ravitch said, sometimes the most brilliant and intelligent minds do not shine in standardized tests because they do not have standardized minds. We, as the human race, think in complex, creative ways. Overloaded curriculum and massive amounts of anxiety and stress are not okay to experience as the result of testing. More tests and higher expectations are not fixing the problem. I urge you to ask the question, will you allow this to continue?